Welcome back to another HBAR DeFi Corner, which wouldn't be possible like a lot of our DeFi space without Bonzo Finance and SaucerSwap, so we appreciate their support. Brady, welcome back.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. Happy to be back.
Yeah, so before we jump into some of these metrics that you cover every other week, I just want to say that before anybody participates in DeFi, make sure that you understand the risks involved, understand that none of this is financial advice, and also understand the laws and regulations in your local jurisdiction. But Brady, with that out of the way, let's go ahead and jump into some of your metrics.
Awesome. Let's jump into it. So as always, we start out with DeFi ecosystem health around DeFi TVL and monthly DEX volume on Hedera. So DeFi TVL today, which is inclusive of liquid staking, is sitting at about 164.83 million in US dollar denominated value and 1.076 billion of HBAR denominated value. And, we've seen a lot of price fluctuations in the market today. So part of something new that we've done here for these slides is broken that out between those two values. I think an HBAR denominated value, I think it gives a more appropriate view maybe of these visuals with regards to TVL. Market's always changing, and the native token on Hedera is obviously HBAR. And so denominating it in that value is a good way to visualize this. We are down a little bit from 2 weeks ago. I think we were sitting at about 170 million. So not too big of a drop or anything, still kind of cranking along.
But going back to what you were saying there, even though we've seen a drop, that's mostly because of the token value drop that we've seen in those 2 weeks. And we've actually seen a little bit of an uptick, at least looking on that chart, in HBAR denominated value.
Yes, slight uptick, still crawling though in HBAR denominated value. But yes, the dollar value drop is definitely due to price fluctuations. And then next up, we have monthly DEX volume. So monthly DEX volume, we closed out the month of May with 203.53 million in US dollar denominated value, and then 1.046 billion in HBAR denominated value. So we've definitely seen a drop from the highs, and that kind of tracking along with TVL and just overall market sentiment as well. Do you have some updates with regards to SaucerSwap, which is sort of the main DEX in terms of TVL and trading volume on Hedera? And so we'll get to that a little bit later, but some exciting updates from them on that front.
But it does look like we plateaued between April and May, at least, right?
Yeah, between April and May, we've hit the same slight increase actually in May in terms of US dollar denominated value. But yeah, we've been hitting the same metrics between those 2 months.
Okay, good stuff.
Next up is stablecoins. So on Hedera, the native stablecoin is Hedera native USDC. And this is broken out into two categories. So stablecoin TVL, or total value locked, and then stablecoin circulating supply, or just overall liquidity on Hedera. In terms of stablecoin TVL, that's the USDC liquidity that's locked in the two main protocols on Hedera today. So SaucerSwap, which is a decentralized exchange, and Bonzo Finance for decentralized lending. In total, TVL is sitting at around 7.18 million in USDC liquidity that's locked. This sort of matches the overall TVL on Hedera. It's been crawling sideways for a bit now. And then in terms of stablecoin liquidity, we saw some rapid rise and then drop that took place. So stablecoin liquidity is back down to 41.17 million. This trend we also saw take place on Algorand and a few other layer 1 and layer 2 networks as well. Can only speculate in terms of what that sharp rise and fall was related to. It seems like it is obviously like a very large entity that was probably participating in something related to Hedera native USDC on the network, possibly some type of treasury management activity. But yeah, back down today to 41.17 million.
Yeah, I actually thought we were going to be able to report an increase here. I saw that it was in the 80s just a few days ago, and we saw that another drop, huh?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, it popped back up, and then I think just within the last couple of days, it's dropped back down.
All right. Well, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And then staking. So liquid staking with HBAR X through Stater Labs is sitting at 5.04%, the smallest decrease from last time. I think it was 5.06%. And then native staking of HBAR on the network is sitting at 0.037%. So that's if you're directly staking an account with HBAR to nodes on the network. Yeah, so no big fluctuations on the staking front. Let's dive into ecosystem updates.
Sounds good. What do you got for us?
Yeah, so kicking things off with Bonzo Finance, starting at the beginning of June, the season 3 of Bonzo Points have launched. So there's been 2 seasons so far. The first run that ran 4 months, and then the second one that ran for 3 months. This third season is the last final season running of Bonzo Points. If you supply liquidity, you earn 2 points for every dollar supplied every 24 hours. And if you borrow liquidity from the protocol, it's 8 points every dollar borrowed every 24 hours as well. Those points accumulate over the period of the season. And then at the end of the season, the leaderboard is used to determine a distribution of Bonzo governance tokens to community members who are participating actively in the protocol. The second update that we have is around support for MetaMask. So final stages of being able to support MetaMask in Bonzo Finance, very similar to SaucerSwap. This just opens up the door to additional retail users being able to come into Bonzo and be able to participate in the protocol, supply liquidity, borrow assets. So the impetus for this was around bridging going live, hopefully within the next month or two. I think there's been a lot of discussion around bridging over the last 6 months or so around when that's actually going to take place. And it seems like there's some things that are coming together to make that really possible in terms of bringing other bridge providers online. So looking forward to that. And then on a longer term timeline at Bonzo Finance, we're contributing to the development of what are called Bonzo Vaults. We're really excited to bring this functionality to Bonzo Finance and to the Hedera ecosystem. We talk about it in detail in the last community Bonzo Bytes spaces that we did that you can go check out. But effectively what Bonzo Vaults are is they're yield strategy vaults that users can come to supply liquidity in. And the vault automatically manages that liquidity and routes it to various protocols across the ecosystem. So Bonzo Lend is obviously one of those protocols where there's a management strategy that it employs. And then a number of strategies on SaucerSwap as well. So instead of having to go to SaucerSwap, for example, and manually set ranges and monitor them closely, and you've talked about this, when you do yield updates in the past, what this does is it effectively automatically manages that liquidity. It tries to concentrate it as effectively as possible. It reduces the overhead and manual work that a user has to do while also maximizing yield. And then for the ecosystem, the benefit is that this helps ensure more efficient markets, less slippage, things of that nature. So, I think it's just going to be a kind of a game changer for people to be able to participate in this. It's something new for the ecosystem that they haven't had before. It is pretty ubiquitous across other networks and ecosystems. There's protocols like Beefy Finance, which is very similar to. Also, Camino Finance on Solana does something similar. And it's also permissionless. So, folks are going to be able to actually go in, and if you're a smart contract developer, you can modularly build these vaults and deploy them and have them be visible in the Bonzo Finance interface and exist as a smart contract on Hedera. And then also, if you build and deploy a vault and it is able to attract a lot of users and maximize yield, the person who deploys it or the entity that deploys it also takes a small fee for doing it. So there's incentives for developers to actually participate in building this. So definitely something I'm really excited about for us to be able to get out there.
Those are some great opportunities. Now, Brady, I do want to go back a little bit to the bridging that you were talking about. Now, I know Ediswap uses layer 0, and this is really important for tokens that exist on 2 different chains. So Karate Combat exists on Ethereum, also on Hedera, both in native forms. USDC is the biggest example, of course, where you have those native forms on either side. And it allows you actually to bridge those tokens and keep those native assets on either side, which I think is huge compared to the wrapped version, even though the wrapped versions of tokens are really important as well. So, who else besides Ediswap is actually working on this, and you think is going to bring products to market to allow people to do this? And what do you think the implications are of having these native tokens being able to bridge between the two so easily?
Yeah, so it's a big ecosystem-wide effort, and I think it's going to happen in piecemeal, in particular with regards to layer zero. Layer zero is a cross-chain messaging infrastructure. It's sort of that base layer that has standards and tools that allows you to build asset bridges on top of it, and you can utilize these standardized contracts that layer zero has created. They're called OFT, or omni-chain fungible token contracts. And there's a couple ways that these OFT contracts can be configured. So one of the ways is what you just described, which is, I'm probably butchering this terminology, but it's sort of like a native OFT standard, in the sense that the liquidity is actually shared across any network in which those contracts exist. So when you have an issuer of an asset, they are the ones that actually approve these OFT contracts to exist on the networks that they decide. And when they do exist, and it is this native OFT form, assets get burned on one chain and then minted on another chain. So effectively, liquidity is shared across networks. What you don't have to do is lock the tokens in a contract and then mint a wrapped version of them on another network. In that sort of previous world that we had, it becomes difficult, especially when there's less liquidity that exists of an asset, because what ends up happening is you could bridge an asset in from, let's say, Arbitrum to Hedera, but then someone, swaps for that asset and then wants to bridge that asset out to Avalanche. If there isn't enough locked liquidity on the Avalanche side for that asset, then they're going to not be able to actually bridge out to Avalanche. They'll probably have to bridge out to a different network and then use another bridge, and it starts to become somewhat complicated. Again, the big impetus there being if and because of a lack of potential liquidity. So the first way sort of solves that problem, and that's sort of the ideal path to take. And there's asset issuers that are being worked with to try and figure out how to make sure that the Hedera network can participate in that native OFT way of doing things. The other way is, I believe it's called a Hydra asset or Hydra OFT contract, where it is that lock and mint mechanism for bringing assets over. And some assets kind of require that if, in many cases, they maybe don't have like an authoritative issuer that puts a stake in the ground and says, okay, these are the canonical contracts for each of these chains. It becomes this lock and mint mechanism. I think the biggest thing that we think about in terms of bridging and ensuring the success of that when you bring a new bridge provider onto the network is you don't want to have bifurcation of assets. So you don't want a bunch of different people trying to create their own OFT contracts, because if each contract is unique and individual, then the asset that it issues on the network is going to be its own different asset. So you want to try to align the entire ecosystem around canonical contracts for a single asset for a single cross-chain bridge provider. So it's a lot of coordination, I think, that's going on with regards to this, and a few prerequisites as well. When you think about issuers wanting to add an additional chain, they want to make sure that they do so in the least risky way possible. And so as part of that, there's multi-sig infrastructure and, a number of other prerequisites that I think they need to ensure that they can do so properly on Hedera.
Makes a lot of sense. All right, so let's take a look at SaucerSwap.
Cool. So for SaucerSwap, man, I've been excited and waiting for this new branding. They've done a bunch of sneak peeks for it. We've got the new logo there as well. They've taken like a more minimalistic approach with Larry, which is really awesome. And with that new branding, it sounds like from their latest AMA, they're also developing a mobile wallet. It's like a mobile application. So similar to what Uniswap has done. I actually downloaded Uniswap's wallet and started playing with that a couple weeks ago, and super seamless experience and really nice. And so, I know I was actually somewhat surprised with regards to Bonzo. Majority of users are actually mobile users, which I found surprising. So it definitely makes sense to try to get everything optimized for mobile, and then even to a further degree, being able to do a native application for mobile devices. So very excited about that as well. In their AMA, they also talked about the ability to do limit orders is something that's coming up on SaucerSwap. So that's an exciting new feature. And then there was additional mentions about a split router, so smart contracts that route trades across multiple pools or bridges for a best price. And it sounds like the development for that's underway. I think they're targeting around August of this year to be able to get that out the door.
All right, that makes a lot of sense. I love the idea of potentially having limit orders. Anybody who's used to the normal way that centralized exchanges work are very familiar with limit orders, and to have that in the DeFi space instead of just dealing with the liquidity pools makes a lot of sense. Of course, it's still going to be done through the liquidity pools, but just having that option to use those limit orders is going to be invaluable. So the next thing we wanted to get into, I just did that interview with YieldFX, and they talk about tokenized deposits. That's what they're bringing to the Hedera space. And Rob has been talking about these tokenized deposits for a long time, talking about how banks prefer them. And it really never clicked in my head what he was exactly talking about, and now it makes a lot more sense. So with stablecoins, you have some kind of a stablecoin issuer, and they take in the dollars, they go and buy treasuries with them, and then they issue the stable coins. Now, in this case, instead of having it represent those short-term treasuries that they hold on to, which of course are cash equivalents, but they also earn a yield, this is actually bank deposits that they're representing. And, I went through the thought process, Brady, of what's it look like for the banking system when you go and get a stablecoin? So if you're withdrawing your dollars from an account, you put it on Binance, you put it on Coinbase, and then you go ahead and shift those dollars into a stablecoin. Well, then that money goes to Circle or whichever stablecoin issuer we're talking about, and they go and buy treasuries with them. Well, you're essentially removing that liquidity from the banking system, because the treasuries are actually held, I think in Circle's case, by BlackRock, right? So there's no bank involved. They're an asset manager. They aren't a bank. So it's kind of, if we're going from where we are now, I think we have about $250 billion worth of stablecoin liquidity across all of the different platforms. If that goes to several trillion, which I think over the next decade it will, that's like a slow bank run, just removing that liquidity from the banking system. And of course, in our financial systems, between the central banks, which represent the banks, there's an awful lot of powerful interests, including the banks themselves, that probably will have something to say about that. That's why they prefer these tokenized deposits, because they want to keep those deposits in the banking system. So they have huge incentives to go with these tokenized deposits. Now, I think when a lot of these banks, I think Bank of America just came out with some big news that they're going to have some kind of a stable coin. I think when they're talking about those stable coins, I think they are actually talking about tokenized deposits, not stable coins themselves. But because stable coin is the lexicon out there, that's what is commonly known as, just like Hedera calling themselves a blockchain, even though technically they're not a blockchain, just for ease of understanding. So I think that Hedera moving into this tokenized deposit space through a team like YieldFX is going to be fantastic. Now, I'm not sure if you saw that interview I did with YieldFX, but what are your general thoughts?
Yeah, so I don't have all the details, so I may be misspeaking here, but it's an interesting thought because to your point, the banks desire folks to deposit assets into the bank, deposit cash into the bank. The bank uses those funds for its own purposes, such as being able to lend out those funds to folks and take a hefty yield for doing so, and that's part of their business model. And when you think about the concept of what value Web3 unlocks, what value this technology unlocks, it's really about sort of disintermediating that whole process in general. I'm curious if it's an adaptation that they're doing where they're trying to retain their existing business model, but also try to adapt to this new technology. And then when I think about that, it makes me wonder, do those business models on enough timeline actually continue to be able to exist? Are they passing the value on to users, or are they trying to extract some of that value for themselves to keep their current business models going? And would someone come in and try to disrupt that because they have a better way of providing value to users, again, on a very long timeline? Maybe you have thoughts on that.
Well, it's going to add some competition, right? It's competition for those bank deposits themselves. Like right now, you can go and mint some USDC on Coinbase, and you can get a pretty hefty yield north of 3%. But if you have a deposit in a bank, it's significantly lower than that, even though they are lending it out to buy treasuries, or they are going and mortgages or personal loans, and they're getting 5, 6, 7% in some of those cases. So they might just need to increase the deposit yields across the board, but also for these tokenized deposits as well. And the next step there is, will these be able to be used in DeFi like we see stablecoins being used? And I think they will. Like initially, I think there's going to be some more controls around it. But talking to YieldFX the other day, I did throw them a question and say, hey, is this going to be able to be used in DeFi? And they were talking about ways they are looking at doing exactly that. So I think it's just going to be another asset that we're going to be able to use out there. It's just another way to leverage this technology, and I'm excited about it. Now, of course, Hedera is going to resonate a lot more with banks than more native crypto teams out there, possibly like Circle. So I think that Hedera is going to be in a good place to go along with this revolution in tokenized deposits. The world is going to be tokenized, and banking deposits being one of those things only makes sense. But we could jump on to the next topic here. We're going to jump into some fun stuff with Karate Combat and the American Sevens Football League. So we've seen a couple times in the past, we had Top Flight Football as well as the Bowling League. Both did up-only gaming events on the Karate Combat app. Well, this next week, we're going to have the American Sevens Football League do the same thing, and I did an interview with them. If you want to check out my channel, you can see exactly what they're doing, but they have their championship coming up this week. The reason why I want to get this out there is because a lot of times people that are paying attention to Karate Combat are just looking for the next Karate Combat event. They're not necessarily looking for these side events that they're doing as well, but they're great opportunities to get some more karate tokens. So don't forget to participate in that. I'm sure the snapshot is going to be coming up pretty soon. The next thing, Brady, that we're going to get into is some of the token launches that are going to be coming up. I know a huge one towards the end of this summer is going to be Sealcoin. I did some more coverage around some of the things that they're doing. I also had not an interview, but we did a presentation over at Hedera Day in Switzerland. And Jonathan, he's the tech guy behind Sealcoin. He gave a great presentation that you can learn a lot from. But I think that's going to be a really big one. We have other teams. We have Circle of Games that's going to be doing one. YieldFX mentioned that they're going to be doing one. We also have Neuron that is looking at doing a token launch. Now, I'm not 100% Neuron is going to be launching on Hedera. I'm hoping that's going to be the case, but they haven't explicitly said that. I think they'd be making a mistake not to, since they have so much goodwill in the space. Regardless, they're still going to be using the Hedera consensus service for all their data tracking and things like that. But I really want to make sure that their token is going to launch on Hedera as well. And I'm sure we can get James to give us some more information. But are there any other token launches that you're looking at, Brady, or anything else in the token space that you'd like to highlight?
Yeah, one more project that I've seen a lot of movement on in the ecosystem is around Origin, which is a token launch platform that's come online on Hedera over the past 6 or 7 months or so. I know they're going to kick off a points program that I've been watching, and it looks very exciting. So there's going to be a number of different ways across the ecosystem, I think, to be able to earn points, which eventually end up converting to the Origin token. And then the platform itself is going to be a token launch platform too. So excited to see what kinds of projects they're going to be able to attract. And yeah, I think it's going to be like a good influx of interest into the ecosystem with more liquidity, more tokens coming online.
And I think one of the main tokens that they're going to be launching is going to be Zoop. And they're the ones that are going after TikTok, with some other team members out there that they're putting together kind of a consortium to try to put a bid in for TikTok. So that's going to be absolutely huge. Now let's get into some yield opportunities that we're seeing in the Hedera space as well. So I'm going to start off with V1 on SaucerSwap. This is providing liquidity for both of these token pairs. So the first one I saw was HBAR Dino, and that's showing an APR of about 53%. HBAR Sauce is at 25%, HBAR USDC at 28%. We have Centex HBAR at 38%. HBAR Pack at 20%, HBAR X Sauce at 18%, HBAR Karate, I saw this is higher than I've seen it a lot in the past, and it's at 37%, and then HBAR Da Vinci at 42%. Moving on to V2, and this is just providing liquidity within a certain range. Now, the yields you can get are significantly higher, but you can essentially get stopped out of your position if it moves out of that range you set. So you won't be earning any yield once you've moved out of your range, and you'll only have either 100% of one token or 100% of the other unless it moves back into that range. So HBAR USDC is at 68%. Another one that caught my eye, USDC Carat. Now that's the token that's backed up by physical diamonds that you can exchange for the actual asset. That's at 134%. So Brady, one thing that I thought was interesting is HBAR Sauce is actually lower on V2 than V1. And that really didn't make sense in my head. But do you know how that could happen?
Yeah, so there's smart routing that takes place on SaucerSwap where it determines the best route for swapping assets in terms of the price impact. It's often that maybe a V2 pool, depending on the amount of liquidity that exists and the fee tier that's set for it, would cause an APY to be less. So if swaps are being routed through the V1 pool rather than the V2 pool in certain instances, you'd have less trading volume on that V2 pool. And then again, also the fee tiers that are set up as well.
So this is something that people that are participating really need to pay a lot of attention to because there is less risk, at least in my opinion, by using V1 compared to V2. So if there's a higher yield on V1, you definitely want to go with that, at least from my point of view. So Jam HBAR is sitting at 98%, really good there. HBAR Bonzo is at 25%. Grelf HBAR is pretty low, down at about 3.5%. And then finally, another really good one, we have HBAR Dovu, a lot of trading going on, so we're up at 110%. Now moving over to Bonzo. Now the risk here is far lower because you don't have the risk of impermanent loss. So these numbers are lower, but you don't have to worry about actually losing your asset. So the first thing that I want to highlight is HBAR, and to supply HBAR on Bonzo, you're getting 0.8%. So significantly higher than what we're seeing as far as native staking. USDC, really nice at 14%. Bonzo itself, because you're getting a little bit of an extra kicker there, is at 7.25%. Sauce is at 1.7%, and Karate is at 0.8%. Next up, we have Steam, which is at 1.4%. Now, Brady, I know they have their banking system, which you can get a pretty healthy yield from. Are you actually able to participate? Are you actually able to participate in the banking system while supplying Steam on Bonzo as well?
There's a partnership with Steam between the Bonzo Finance protocol, where if you're holding the liquidity pool tokens for the deposit that you made of Steam into Bonzo, those additionally count towards the banking system in the same way that it would if you were holding the Steam asset. And then I think we do see, because the borrow rates have been pretty high with regards to Steam, what I believe is taking place is folks borrowing it, against another asset to be able to participate in the banking system just for holding Steam.
All right, that makes sense. So for PAC, we're looking at 3.5%. Grelf gets a little bit of an extra kicker. You're up at 6.3% for providing liquidity there. And KBL, same thing. They give it a little bit of a kicker. So you're up at 4.6%. So Brady, do you have any thoughts on any of the yield opportunities we have going on?
Yeah, just wanted to cite one thing with regards to Bonzo. You mentioned there's single asset pools, so there's no impermanent loss. There is always smart contract risk, though, with regards to DeFi, and that's inclusive of Bonzo, SaucerSwap, any sort of decentralized protocol that has smart contracts.
That's a good point. Now, of course, your smart contracts have been vetted, all that kind of stuff. They are as safe as you can make them, but it's really good for everybody to understand that those risks are out there. Brady, before we let you go, is there anything else you'd like to pass on?
No, not too much else. Just want to say if you're in the Hedera ecosystem, you're holding HBAR, you're trying to get more involved and understanding some of these tools and protocols. Definitely, would love to see more people jump in, play around with them, try to understand how they work. I know all the teams on Hedera are open to answering questions. Everyone's incredibly helpful. So yeah, everybody's here to support if you're dipping your toes into DeFi on Hedera.
Exactly. I mean, that's a great point to leave on. Brady, we appreciate you giving us some time today, and we'll see you in a couple weeks.
Awesome. Thanks.